Shia Fazell. I'm currently an EMT student at Dallas College, taking a paramedic course. Today I will be taking you back to Staten Island in 2003, where on October 15th, 2003, there was a mass casualty incident, and we're just gonna go over and talk about what had happened, some of the issues leading up to the accident, how the EMS responded, and therefore some of the things that we could have learned or taken away from this incident. So to start off with, the Andrew J. Burberry, or the Staten Island Ferry, is the mechanical vessel that was being used during the time of this accident. It slammed into a maintenance pier at full speed on October 15th, 2003. Typical route was from Manhattan to Staten Island. It was about a 25-minute trip, so not too crazy long. As we all know, or if you do not, New York is a very largely populated area. It gets a lot of domestic and international travelers, so a lot of their public transportation is very essential in this city, especially with the ferry system. The Burberry was roughly 310 passengers. Is about 310 feet long. They took about 65,000 passengers daily, over 20 million passengers per year. Wasn't that fast of a boat, max 18 knots, which is about like 20 to 25 miles an hour. The cruising speed was, I believe, around 16 to 17 knots, so roughly about 20 miles an hour. The Andrew J. Burberry was carrying approximately 15,000 passengers at the time of this incident. The crew members were about 15, and the crash occurred mid-afternoon. Not during any peak hours or rush hours, no congestion on the waters. So speaking back onto the crew, there was about 15 crew members on board during this incident. One, the most notable, would be Richard Smith, the assistant captain on the boat. Most commonly, the assistant captain can be referred to as the pilot. They're typically the one that are steering the vessel. Mr. Smith was a longtime employee of the New York City Department of Transportation, which operates the Staten Island Ferry. With being an assistant captain, he was routinely in charge of navigation, especially during the phases of docking. And this will come up here shortly. He had decades of experience working with the ferry system, and he was reported to have suffered from chronic back pain, hypertension, depression, and anxiety. With that being said, he did take prescription medication, which will be important here shortly. So, the incident itself. So the crash happened at 3:20 p.m. On October 15th. The Andrew J. Burberry slams into a maintenance pier at the St. George Ferry Terminal in Staten Island. It was making just a routine run from Manhattan to Staten Island. They had checked the ferry prior to departure, and there had been no reported mechanical issues or failures for said boat. And after the incident, the reports were also conclusive that there was no mechanical issues for anything that happened during this crash. It was traveling at its cruising speed, so that's 16, 17 knots, so not speeding or at any abnormal speeds at the time of the crash. Standard operating procedures for the ferry, typically for when it was docking, is that it slows down quite a few minutes prior, just part of the procedure when it comes to docking. And that's when we refer back to Mr. Smith. One of his delegated items was to doc and make sure that everything is correct. At the time, there was only one licensed officer in the wheelhouse, and that completely that violates the procedures in place by the Marina. It was law at this point in time that you should have at least 2 people in the wheelhouse, just for safety reasons, insurance reasons, making sure that nothing is to go wrong, and if there is, that there is a backup person there. So it violated a city policy. Smith was the only one in control of the vessel and navigation at the time, being the only one in there at this at time of impact. So nobody else was able to have a second hand of eyes in case of emergency. Referring back to Mr. Smith, like we said, he had a couple of diagnosed medical issues, which he took prescription medication for. And some of those medications included tramadol, which is a medication that's typically given for pain. It can cause drowsiness, fatigue, dizziness, and fainting. Another prescribed medication that Mr. Smith was on was Zoloft, which is an antidepressant, which also may cause fatigue, blurry vision, and poor concentration. With that being said, following the incident, investigators came to the belief that he experienced a medical issue during the time of impact. It said that he either had a syncopal episode or a seizure due to his medication, and that's what led to the crash of the ferry. That correlates back into the negligence of following through with the policies mandated for the ferry system and having that second person in the wheelhouse during these times. It is said too that the lookout who was stationed, so obviously the second person who was supposed to be in there, had been sent away before docking, violating protocol as well. There's no information as to why specifically that person was asked to leave. So here's some pictures of the crash and at the site. It was on the starboard side of the boat, and it left a 210-foot gash along the starboard side. During this time, with it being such a very short trip, most of the residents or passengers on the boat who were expecting to exit the boat relatively soon were standing in these areas, which happened to be the exits of the boat. With the lack of information given out by the staff due to there not being another person in the wheelhouse, passengers and other crew members were not informed of any dangers or anything at this time. So with a lot of those passengers standing up front waiting to deboard the boat, a lot of our casualties and deaths that were reported happened to be at this specific site due to most of them expecting to get off the boat relatively soon. Dozens were injured, about 70 people were found. 30 of them were considered to be critical or serious. 11 people died, and most of them were declared dead at the scene. So with that being said, during the moment of impact, dispatch was informed of a large vessel crashing into a terminal and many injured passengers at 3:21 and roughly 3:23. The dispatch was very ill informed of the severity of the incident and the number of casualties and the severity of their injuries. With that being said, multiple agencies responded within minutes, that including the Coast Guard, NYPD, fire and EMS, and the hospitals and responding clinics around. EMS set up triage zones outside the terminal around 3:35 to 3:45, and secured a scene command was established. They were having issues, limited access to get to the ferry. It was very narrow, lots of congested areas, and lots of passengers frantically panicking and everything like that. So it was a difficult scene to come into. They had to work quickly, so around 3:45 to 4:15 is when the main triage portion started, patient stabilization, transporting, classifying which category each patient was in. Extracting the passengers became an issue, with a lot of them being trapped in the wreckage. A lot of have been thrown against steel supports, pinned in against twisted metal from the boat. They stabilized the patients, reported advanced life support measures such as IV fluids, oxygen, bleeding control. There was quite a few amputations due to the impact. Some reports from guests as well as the paramedics were stating that there was a lot of blood. People were just lying there, some motionless, others crying for help. It was like something out of a war zone, from a FDNY paramedic. There was about 15 ambulances in cycle during the first initial response, cycling between the terminal and the hospitals. More units arrived from Brooklyn and Manhattan to assist and relieve the burden of the Staten Island crews. This took place around 4:15 to 5. As EMS and FDNY worked together, they were able to then recheck for any unidentified passengers, continue treatment for the less critical patients, and manage the families and walking wounded. So with that being said, we're very grateful to the EMS personnel that handled the situation and were able to take care of all those that were injured. The 2003 Staten Island ferry crash was one of the most complex and intense mass casualty incidents in New York since that of 9/11 in 2001. Despite all of that and the chaotic and traumatic nature of the crash, EMS was on scene within 10 minutes, and they were able to triage and transport dozens of injured passengers. However, the critical points for improvement on said incident would that include delayed recognition of the severity. So with those dispatch calls not providing any enough information of the severity of the issue, it took a minute before it was declared a mass casualty incident. And for the responders on scene, they had expected it to be more of a docking issue rather than a medical and very high traumatic incident at the time. So access as well to the scene was a challenge, with it being at a port. They were having a difficult time staging and letting ambulance personnel through, just all the medical responsive teams, as well as just hysteria was going on, making it difficult for transport times. Hospital loading and balancing. It was reported that while most of the urgent care or critical patients did get to where they needed urgently, there was a couple hospitals that were just pretty much to capacity, whereas some were still had quite a bit of room, therefore delaying a little bit of treatment for some of the less critical patients at the time, as well as mental health and psychological support. So it was reported by many EMS responders later that the scene as emotionally was under-described for how emotionally overwhelming it was. The visual amputation, crushed bodies, screaming victims was something that they weren't expecting to come into at that, based off of the call. They were obviously provided peer support and critical incident debriefing, but some felt that this was underemphasized at the time. So besides all of that, obviously that showed the city, following this incident, that there were quite a few things that they needed to implement for their response on these types of situations. So following the incident, they did update their mass casualty protocols and procedures. They were able to start, it was just a turning point for them to really realize that they were underprepared to deal with the veracity of a situation like this, even following something such as 9/11. Improved integrancy, coordination. So with the late consideration that this was a mass casualty incident, the additional support and resources was delayed, as well as trying to reach out to different organizations such as like New York PD and the Staten Island. It just took a second for those response times, and as well as to figure out that this casualty or this incident was that on the scale of a mass casualty. So after this incident, they decided that the communication between all the circulating and close agencies needed to be improved as well. Specialized EMS training for maritime disasters. They just realized that these types of on-water type of situations, they were ill prepared for. Not to say that they were ill advised on this severity of incident coming onto the water. Pre-incident planning for ferry and maintenance incidents. Obviously, this showed them that for these types of incidents that they might happen, and that they just need to be better prepared when it comes to extracting the patients, rendering care, transporting, staging. And then specialized EMS training for maritime disasters. Basically, this all reiterates that this incident was a turning point for them to realize that their response in these types of incidents could be fixed or could be improved, in order to render the best care for these patients that are in dire need of emergency care. So with all that being said, the end results of the incident was only 11 deaths, and it did just pave the way for the city to start implementing better